Welcome to Matters Financial and Geopolitical from a Frontier. Thank you kindly for stopping by. I do appreciate it. I thank His Excellency the British High Commissioner, Dr. Christian Turner, for an excellent Eat, Tweet, 2, the sequel dinner last night. We had Alan Kamau from Portland Communications present to us their recent report about how Africa tweets. And it turns out that the top tweeter at the Foreign Office is in fact Dr. Turner. I learned that yesterday. I'll put up a photograph of him, and then I'll put up a photograph I took as I went outside. I looked in and I took a photo looking in hashtag #EatTweet2, and then a very interesting slide from Portland Communications about Africa social media, Facebook, and interestingly the homegrown Mixit. If you look at those statistics in this slide that you see in front of you, it's pretty extraordinary. I asked Bob, I said, that number's big. He said, that's really big. And then Senator Kip Merkerman took a photograph of Bob and I tweeting. I'll put that up as well. Interesting tweets. Paula Kahumbu said the most powerful and trusted voices rise up on Twitter. The people with most followers are good-looking girls, said Joe Oten, and Turner said to Bob C. Ronnie Osumba says, having looked at a slide about what time Africa tweets towards the evening, Ronnie said, well, I'm tweeting at the wrong time when I tweet good morning from the 8th floor. My home thoughts. I went to Hemingways for the first time in Nairobi. I'll put up a photograph I took of the view out towards the Gong Hills. I was participating in a TV program called The Billion Bob Question with Dennis McCorry, and it was most enjoyable. Returning back to Don Delillo and Mao, and it's been uppermost on my mind, it really is a luminous, extraordinary writer. And he cited the publisher Salinger's photograph and a photograph of a unification church blessing ceremony he came across as inspiration for the book. The book starts with these parents in the audience, an enormous audience watching, trying to scan all these men and women getting married under the church of Reverend Moon. And it's an extraordinary opening for the novel. We can imagine the stress the parents would have been going through in such a situation. I'll just give you another quote. I didn't know it at the time, but these two pictures, the one of the wedding ceremony and another one of Mao, would represent the polar extremes of Mao too, the arch-individualist and the mass mind. From the mind of the terrorist to the mind of the mass organization. In both cases, it's the death of the individual that has to be accomplished before their aims can be realized. Important point, I think. Political Reflections Parliamentary Speaker says Assad won 88.7% of votes in Syria's presidential poll. I declare the victory of Dr. Bashar Hafez al-Assad as president of the Syrian Arab Republic with an absolute majority of the votes cast in the election, Laham said in a televised address from his office in the Syrian parliament. Fawaz Gersh, a Middle East expert based in London, called the election win a culmination of Assad's accumulated victories since his opponents took up weapons against his regime in 2011. The opposition does not seem to be able to genuinely change the balance of power on the ground, and that's a fact. I think essentially, I think he does have a popular mandate, maybe not 88.7% given the circumstances under which the vote was taken. But I think the bottom line is he does. And then I came across this quote from an article Robert Fisk has written in the Independent. There is a mine in the next alley, a Nusra man had obligingly written at a street corner. Another ominously inscribed the words, when the night comes, the killing begins. And that took me to Act 3, Scene 1, line 273 of Julius Caesar, cry havoc and let slip the dogs of war. And indeed, that was what happened, I think. US President Obama says we stand together now and forever for your freedom is ours. This was in Poland. Thai junta brings happiness to the people. Are you in need of a pick-me-up? How about a free haircut or hot meal? A dance show by women in PVC miniskirts, perhaps a chance to pet a pony. All this and more is now available to you courtesy of the Royal Thai Army's Happiness Campaign, which is staging free festivals across Bangkok to bring back happiness to the Thai public following last month's military coup. A bizarre combination of an army-controlled street party and a music festival. The parties have been taking place in parks and squares where the public is showered with free food and drink and given an opportunity to watch the army sing and dance and take selfies next to trussed-up soldiers. Nearby there was a selfie stand in front of a giant banner reading happiness, allowing the public to take pictures of themselves with soldiers in riot gear and wrap-around sunglasses. "Oh, he's so handsome, take my picture," shouted one young woman as she queued for a photo. And the Thai general, who was the catalyst for the coup, said the Thai people, like me, have probably not been happy for 9 years, he said last month, but since May 22nd there is happiness. Ai Weiwei has written in Bloomberg what China loses by forgetting. How can a government that alters or even completely erases history acknowledge its faults and adjust its actions in the future? How long, says Ai Weiwei, can China continue on this forgetful path with the internet and globalization, exposing citizens to truths that are self-evident everywhere elsewhere in the world? The country is facing an internal crisis of credibility. The loss of trust and moral common ground between individuals and the state is the most dangerous issue facing the regime today. China cannot move forward unless it first confronts this problem, rather than suppressing it like so much else in our history. I'll put up a photograph of Tiananmen Square from 1988 and another one as well. I'll put up a photograph of Ai Weiwei, where he was famously arrested, and another one of my favorite installations, which is What's in a Name? And he says, "A name is the first and final marker of individual rights, one fixed part of the ever-changing human world. A name is the most basic characteristic of our human rights, no matter how poor or how rich. All living people have a name, and it is endowed with good wishes and the expectant blessings of kindness and virtue." Looking through Photo Booth today, they had a photograph of Saddam's bedroom and another one called Chair, and both were very arresting photographs, I thought. Currency markets, the euro is just above 136 at 136.10. Of course, it hit 135.86 on May 29th, which was a February 13 low. Dollar index 80.64, but it looks a bit toppy to me here. Japanese yen 102.51, the Swissy 0.8971, the pound 167.48, Aussie, a little bit of a rebound going on, 0.9286, India rupee 59.305. South Korean won 10.2161, the Rial is at 227.84, the Egyptian pound is finding support here, last trading 714.96, and the Rand sort of seemingly stabilizing around the 1074.62 level. JP Morgan's global FX volatility index rose for a third day yesterday, but it's coming off a very super low base. Dollar index, I'll put up a 3-month chart, it looks toppy to me. Euro dollar, I think quite a bit of it is now priced in, but clearly I would err on the side of the ECB going to about negative 0.15%. The market's positioned for 0.1. Gold at 1244.125. I think it will remain under pressure and we should see a move lower still. Crude oil elevated, not as high as those 104, 105 levels we saw, still at 102.38. But I think that's more a Libyan story, and a lot of Chinese buying has driven up that oil price. Coming to sub-Saharan Africa, China takes more assertive line in South Sudan diplomacy. China is swapping its reserved diplomacy for a hands-on approach to help resolve a more than 5-month-old rebellion in South Sudan that threatens Beijing oil investments. Subtle change has been evident in months of faltering peace talks in the Ethiopian capital, where Chinese officials have been in regular contact with Western diplomats to help regional African mediators push for a halt to fighting. Diplomats say the permanent Chinese presence at the Addis Ababa talks and their frequent lobby chats and closed-door consultations with diplomats from the United States, Britain and Norway, the main Western backers of newly independent South Sudan, shows China's more proactive approach. What's very striking is that he was given the floor. This is referring to the Chinese ambassador to Ethiopia. And he was given the floor and did not vary one bit from what everyone else was saying, which was basically telling the South Sudanese factions to get your act together. Saying that the new line does not mean China plans to abandon its oft-stated policy of steering clear of Africa's internal politics, but it is an indication of a gradual shift by Beijing as its stake in Africa's stability grows with expanding investments. The luxury of being the new guy in town is definitely on the wane now that there are pretty serious assets in these countries and need to protect them. For now, South Sudan offers exceptional circumstances to prompt more proactive Chinese diplomacy. 5% of Beijing's oil imports came from South Sudan when it was pumping at full tilt. And clearly, we've got to watch that space. It's going to be interesting. And things have reshuffled a lot since I wrote that piece for the Christian Science Monitor, where I wrote about how South Sudan's oil cut off, brilliant negotiating or suicide. And I'll just read it a bit. I wrote then, I was saying then there is a backstory to this. Through 2011, Sudan provided China with 5% of its total oil imports. You will recall that 35,000 Chinese workers were evacuated out of Libya. China was rolled right back out of there not so long ago. Then I was referring to President Obama issuing a memorandum in January where he says, by the authority vested in me as president by the Constitution and the laws of the United States, including Section 503A of the Foreign Assistance Act of 1961 as amended, and Section 3A1 of the Arms Export Control Act as amended, I hereby find that the furnishing of defense articles and defense services to the Republic of South Sudan will strengthen the security of the United States and promote world peace. That was the official text of Obama's decision. And I said then that it seemed to me that Sudan had become the epicenter of the US's and China's collision in Africa. And then I was saying we're watching a 21st century high-stakes proxy war. But what's interesting is that the US was heavily invested in the succession of South Sudan, but I don't think they're as heavily invested in Salva Kiir as they were when I was writing that piece. I'll put up a photograph of the River Nile seen from Juba, taken 1,647 days ago. The South African oil shares up 8.007% in 2014. Dollar Rand, as I said, we've been softening up of late. We're near this 1075 level. Egyptian pound stable at 7.1496. The Egyptian stock market, best performing stock market in Africa, up 19.669%. Nigerian all share is up 0.721%, but bear in mind has rallied 8.195% over the past 4 weeks, and just layer that over the news flow and you can see it's quite an extraordinary outcome. Ghana Stock Exchange up 8.48%. In 2014, the Uganda Central Bank lowered its policy rate for the first time this year, cut its policy rate by 50 basis points. Annual consumer inflation rate dropped to 5.4% last month, and that was reflecting easing food crop prices. That's in comparison to what we saw in Nairobi, where we saw an eye-popping gain in month-on-month inflation rate. The government of Kenya is now marketing its Eurobond. There is a link on the front page and on rich wrap-ups of the preliminary prospectus. Barclays, JP Morgan, and Standard Group and QNB Capital are organizing investor meetings in San Francisco, Los Angeles, Boston, New York, and London from today until June 15. Entering global bond markets after record Africa sales in 2013, including a first-time sale by Rwanda, and weren't there. Rwanda's timing was impeccable. They sold it when the 10-year was at its bubble high, and it's really performed well, that bond. African dollar notes returned 8.3% this year, compared with 8% for emerging markets. Yield on 10-year shilling debt, little change at 12.2%, within 6 basis points of a record high reached last month. Zambia, of course, paid 8.5% when it sold $1 billion of Eurobonds last month. The yield has subsequently rallied to 7.46%. And on that basis, looking at the other issuers, I'm coming up with a market range of between 7 and 7.5%. I said the issue size will not be less than $1.5 billion. This is on the 26th of May, and I think they're going to go for the $2 billion. That's because they got a redemption of $600 million of syndicated loan, and there is talk that they have circled another $800 million for down payment for the Standard Railway, but I'm not sure about that. I'll have to see. But if that is the case, then the net new money is not going to be that dramatic. And P.S. Kamal Thuge, who said when the Eurobond goes through, hard currency worth billions of shillings will have a strengthening impact on the shilling and pull down interest rates. This is the kind of scenario our next fiscal year is based on. That clearly, if they are not making an $800 million down payment, I'll go with what Kamal was saying. But if they are, then I won't. In November, I wrote about Kenya's joining Africa's Eurobond League. I said the key metric to watch is the credit spread. That is a market-driven measure, and it is dynamic. I said then bondholders take no prisoners. Once we issue our Eurobond, we have essentially given the international markets a vehicle to price Kenya's credit spread on a daily and a real-time basis. I said I'm exaggerating a little, but not much. The global markets will be poring over every single utterance on a real-time basis, and that spread about which I spoke will start moving around. Kenya shilling last at 87.50 as people anticipate the inflow of hard currency, and I wrote about that when we were popping above 88, that I thought that was going to be the bottom. CIC plans to raise 3 billion shillings through a corporate bond. CIC Insurance, and that's been one of the top performers at the stock exchange this year. Their top shareholders, the Cooperative Insurance Society, recently signed a joint venture deal with the Malawi Union of Savings and Credit Cooperatives, MUSCO, to start an insurance firm in Malawi, looking at Uganda and I believe South Sudan as well. Nairobi All shares at 4-week lows. It's up 9.2133% this year. The Nairobi NSE 20 is down 1.429% this year and is at 3.5-month lows. Kenya Airways' Dreamliner started its Nairobi-Paris service, and I went for that event, and I filmed. The captain is a lady captain, and I believe the only African lady captain of a Dreamliner, so I'll put up that link imminently. Katrina Manson is saying the travel ban is fueling radicalism in Kenya's second city, Mombasa. No sooner had Joe Hassan, Governor of Mombasa, sat down at a seaside restaurant after flying back from a meeting about security with Kenya's president last month than a blast rang out. They're ruining their own country, Mr. Hassan said as he raced to the scene of what turned out to be a grenade attack that injured 2. Hassan was referring to homegrown Islamist militants thought to be members or sympathizers of neighboring Al-Shabaab. Kenya's tourism-dependent seaside city of Mombasa, which is home to a significant Muslim minority, was last month designated a no-go zone for tourists by the UK and other Western governments. Subsequent clarifications say that they're specifically focusing on Mombasa Island in particular. Experts believe the security threat comes both from battle-hardened Al-Shabaab operatives crossing into Kenya, as well as young, homegrown recruits and their radical local leaders. Talking about Westgate, that was September. March, a major incident was narrowly averted when the Mombasa police impounded a suspicious vehicle that turned out to be a super high-tech car bomb, in the words of one diplomat, and it actually sat at the police station for a number of days with the detonator, would you believe? The government is doing more radicalization than Al-Shabaab itself, says Manbui Masaru Muhuri, a Muslim rights group. And clearly we've got a very, very volatile situation there. And I think, the Swahili coast has been a tinderbox for a while, and I've said that before. Travel warnings, unfortunately, are going to see a large number of people being tipped into the street. It is akin to lighting a match, in my opinion. I'll put up a photograph of the sunset in Mombasa, and another one of Mombasa Island that I took on Boxing Day. I think, the new money that we're going to get from the Eurobond is going to support the equity markets. There's been a lot of bifurcation at the Nairobi Securities Exchange this year. Outperformance by the big caps of Safaricom, EABL, speaking to continued global demand for AAA SSA issuers. Then you've had this interesting outperformance by the small caps. Value stocks like Kenya Airways, Mumias have slipped sharply in the last couple of weeks. That is really overdone now, and I think you'll see some buying come into that. But overall, I think the market will find strength in the next few sessions, as long as the insecurity levels stay on the trend line, which is elevated, as we all know. Once again, thank you for stopping by.